Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hello. Hi, everybody. How you doing this morning? It is Wednesday, January 6th, 2021. My all-purpose, all countries, all religious calendar on the refrigerator says today is Epiphany, and I guess it feels like a good Epiphany, wouldn't you think? We got a lot to do today, to run the government and stuff. You may have woken up to the good news of what appears to be victory in both of the Georgia Senate runoff races, which means the Senate, once they get around to certifying everything and swearing in the new members, and remember, swearing in is important, it'll be a 50-50 evenly divided Senate with starting on the 21st anyway, or at least I guess, we'll do it as early as possible. 12:01 p.m. on January 20th. We'll have 50-50 Senate, and the presiding officer, when she decides to attend sessions, be Kamala Harris, which will give us, if necessary, a tie-breaking 51st vote in the Senate, and therefore control of the Senate as well. So remember when the 2020 elections went a lot more poorly than everybody thought, and there was no blue wave, and it was terrible, and yada yada. And then we were reminded that just like 2018, if you wait a little while and finish counting and wait for the dust to settle and take a look again, you'll find that it really wasn't all that bad, and in fact it was a pretty good year. Well, we're there again. It's true that seats were lost in the House, but again, we'll go over this, I'm sure, at some point during the balance of the show, but in the end, we'll now have a Democratic White House, House, and Senate, and that usually leads to pretty good things. It was a dismaying, moment in waiting for the election results yesterday and realizing, oh yeah, this is where a Republican sometimes will pull out a narrow victory, and then all the pundits will say, yes, well, you see, the wise voters of Georgia have decided that they prefer divided government, and they are voting for a Republican Senate as a check against a one-party control of government, which actually has always been kind of a ridiculous claim. And the idea that, I just find it bizarre to graft that sort of analysis on top of things. I guess it's something to say, and you got to fill airtime. I'm familiar with that, but the idea that Georgia came together and decided what we really need is divided government, when they just very clearly voted pretty, and they need divided government just in order to mix things up, and the vote was just very highly polarized. And how you count out of that, well, what we need is a little bit from both sides of the aisle, is always been a mystery for many of us. Anyway, yes, so we'll have lots to discuss today. Greg Dworkin will be here to help round up the election results and what they mean. Of course, today is also January 6th, the day designated for the counting of the electoral votes in Congress. It should be interesting and will take place under a new mood in Washington, D.C. Let's read out what Bill has for us from up in Portland, Maine, letting everybody know that the show is live now. Will today be a good day for the Democrats? It's a good question. Kagro X, me, David Waldman, shakes his magic 8-ball and reveals all. That might as well. I'll shake my magic Greg Dworkin anyway. We'll see what happens. What's been rattling around inside his head. I don't want to give him a headache or anything. I'm not going to shake it too hard, but it should be a day. In the meantime, Trump's troops, for whatever purpose they may serve, have apparently showed up in Washington. The Proud Boys came to Washington to do something, and I guess they spent the night practice fighting the D.C. police And it wasn't even the riot police that were out, by the way. Another sign of disparate treatment, of course, but you were going to see that anyway. But decided to charge a line of bicycle cops somewhere and essentially got their asses handed to them, which is a thing that happens when you charge in and try to fight police. And they got, thrown back, let's say. They got their asses handed to them pretty good, a lot of pepper spray. Kind of an interesting thing to watch, and nothing new. We saw, as we mentioned the other day, in Salem, Oregon, we had a confrontation between them and the police, and they decided they're going to burn their Blue Lives Matter flags, etc. Yes, Greg is sharing with me the picture that I saw very aptly captioned yesterday as Sir Insalot, which I thought was pretty good. One of the weirdo cosplayers who shows up not only in makeshift battle gear, but in with a Captain America shield and a big lance with a boxing glove on the end of it. It was like a cartoon character. It was an interesting night. It should be an interesting day. There'll be a pall cast over the protest scheduled for today. Kelly Loeffler yesterday promised that she would be here in D.C. to cast her vote in support of the objections to the electoral vote. I wonder whether she'll miss her flight. David Perdue, who also said he would like to have been here for that, will not, because he's not a senator. His term ended on January 3rd, and not only have they not finished certifying the vote, but when they do finish, it won't be for him, so he won't be back to do it. We'll see. It'll be very interesting to watch whether the resolve of any of the Senate Republicans, anyway, falters, and they don't show up for the Trump-supporting side. I think a lot of people will be reevaluating what it means. It was always not going to work, but what a heavy political and psychological lift it would be to lose the election, lose all the recounts, lose all the court cases, lose 2 Georgia statewide Senate runoff races, and then come back and say, they were wrong every time. That's 99 mistakes in a row, and I've got to turn this around. It's going to be tough for fence sitters to come jump off the fence in favor of riding the Trump wave here. So it'll be good to watch them squirm and become uncomfortable with it. It won't work in the House, but that was a lost cause. Greg Dworkin is here. Trying to get a word in edgewise might be a lost cause, but why don't we pause for a second? I'll yield to the gentleman from Connecticut for the purposes of a brief statement. Good morning, Greg.
And thank you to my good friend from Virginia, because we love people from Virginia.
Sure.
Watching that cosplayer with the Boba Fett helmet, the Captain America shield, the Ninja Turtle leggings, in jeans,
yes,
right, with a big pole with a boxing glove on the top. I think, I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure that's Jim Jordan. And he's getting ready for today's wrestling match. But there's no wrestling symbol you can have at the top of a pole, so you put a boxing glove. Because,
I guess so.
A gym is a gym is a gym, right?
Right, if you put the wrestling singlet at the top there, I don't know what that's supposed to mean. It's like...
but the onesie. The thing is...
No, that's what I mean. Yeah.
That
onesie is a better word.
You're absolutely correct in your summary. In your pregame summary that we have here. Excellent. Because, you lose in court, you lose at the ballot box, you're going to lose today.
Yes.
And then you're going to claim your winners. And, of course, Axios and Politico has the Republicans quietly seething, furious at Trump because he, and the problem is that it's been quiet, that it's been behind the scenes. Just goddamn say it for a change. If you had done that 4 years ago, we would have been in a much better place.
Yes. Although I did see much circulated this morning, the time they did say so, when they were running in a primary against him, but they've forgotten since then, right? And they've said the opposite.
But Trump lost bigly the last few days, which I think is important. And of course, we're going to dissect that. That's part of what we do here. And we're going to look at the numbers. And, I saw some of my good friends on Twitter saying, I'm just shocked at the results yesterday. And I have to tell you, I'm not shocked. I thought it was a lean D situation. Why? Because I look at the polls. That's what the polls told us. And the polls were right. And the polls said, it's going to be a 1 or 2 point race, but it leans D. Leans D does not mean you win.
Yeah.
Again, interpreting polls. Oh, we're up by 1. What does that mean? It means it's anybody's race, but we're up by 1. So stop giving me this, oh my God, we're going to lose. I know we're going to lose. I doubt it. I just can't believe we're going to, Democrats just cannot accept winning. We were
It's hard.
winning these races just like we were winning the presidential race. And it was likely that we were going to win the presidential race. This wasn't likely, but it was clearly a toss-up lean D. It wasn't a Republicans' race to lose. These were two terrible candidates. And one of the things that, again, I think we have to emphasize, especially with Reverend Warnock,
Yes.
is, first of all, again, we talked about this on Monday, the WNBA team Atlanta Dream wearing shirts promoting Warnock when Warnock was at 9% in the polls in the jungle primary.
Yeah.
Part of it. And the shift that took place to make this happen yesterday is pretty amazing. And we'll talk about that a little bit too.
Okay.
But again, I just have to emphasize the huge mistake,
Yes.
error, the ridiculous thinking that is just so reminiscent of Macaca, Virginia, where Doug Collins thought it was perfectly okay to disrespect the black church and go after Reverend Warnock on those grounds. He's not really a Christian, as if church-going black grandmothers don't vote.
Yeah. I mean,
And that was just a huge mistake in a close race. That was probably the difference. Of course, Loeffler is a terrible candidate. She's a crook, and she was never elected to anything.
Yes, big problem.
And Perdue was at least better known, but neither one of them are, shall we say, Johnny Isaacson and reach out to black voters.
Yeah.
And so, elections have consequences, and your actions before the election have consequences. And Doug Collins acting like black voters don't count in Georgia was, let's just say, an unforced error.
Yes. Well, it was lots of unforced errors all around. I was focusing mostly just on the latest things, like, I'm thinking about the other Senate Republicans who will be seething about the last-minute scramble on the $2,000 checks and the gambit that the winning formula here is to somehow oppose the president because he's not serious
that's exactly
or something.
Right. I mean, you opened the show talking about the fact that people talk about checks and balances and checks.
Yeah.
You got to elect Republicans for check. No, you have to elect Democrats if you want your damn check.
That's true too. Yes.
And that's exactly what happened here. Republicans were saying, you've seen the gridlock, you've seen how nothing gets done. You want more of this, don't you, folks? Mm-hmm. That's what we're going to run on. Run on more of getting nothing done at a time where everything has to be done. Georgia's exploding right now with COVID cases, and they need those checks, and they need a better vaccine distribution plan, and they need help. And the Republicans and Mitch McConnell are promising you're not going to get it. Vote for me. Mm-hmm. How stupid is that? And so, you know what? It didn't work. So I got this nice picture from the New York Times site, results by county, where you could see the little blue arrows showing a blue shift, more Democratic, and which counties went more blue and which counties went more red. And for the ones that are big enough to actually see, there's dozens of blue arrows where things went more blue since November.
Yeah, okay.
And only 2 counties where it went more red in a way that you could see. And these 2 counties each have about 1,500 people. My town in Connecticut is like 32,000.
Yeah.
Just to put things in perspective here. And there's a blue shift in Georgia that took place because people who voted for Biden and Perdue, and this is specifically looking at Perdue, said last time, I'm a Republican and I vote Republican. I always vote Republican. Even the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, and his assistant who was doing Sterling, who was doing all of the discussion. If you don't remember who Sterling is, he looks kind of like Roger Ebert.
Oh, yes, okay.
Talking about how Trump was wrong about this, Trump was wrong about this, Trump was wrong about this, but I still vote Republican and I vote for Trump and I probably vote for Trump again, but he's, killing me and he's wrong about everything, but I'll vote for him anyway because I always vote Republican. So you have people who do that. And they may well have done that right up until the election, except for that phone call from Trump where he was strong-arming Brad Raffensperger, and it was so clear that everybody could hear it, and they could deny as much as they wanted to that that's not really what he said. Who are you going to believe, me or your lying ears and eyes?
Yes.
But, people did believe it, and they said, you know what, this is just too much. I'm voting for Ossoff this time.
Yeah, if they hadn't already done it.
Or as Michael Cohen, the columnist from the Boston Globe put it, having a 33-year-old Jewish guy elected as senator is like great for Jewish men all over the country, except for the part where they have to talk to their mothers.
Why aren't you doing
this guy got elected senator. What have you done?
Yes, right. So, all right, well, that'll make things difficult for the rest of the day.
Right, and of course, for Reverend Warnock and being the first black senator, I think, not just from Georgia, who's a Democratic senator, but I think from the South, I think. That's just amazing.
Yes.
And, it's I've got a nice piece here. I don't know if we'll get to it, from Reverend Barber, talking about some of this stuff. Georgia Senate election in 2021 reveals the need for a new Southern strategy, which is basically when people who have been lied to and pitted against one another unite to organize and vote together, they can reclaim the levers of power. And watching Ossoff and Warnock campaign together, I mean, you got the impression they generally like each other.
Yes,
and for those of us who are old enough, like myself, you remember the Freedom Riders and the Goodman, Schwerner and Cheney, and the idea that Jews and blacks could go together and work together in a ecumenical way for civil rights is like, yeah, we could use that.
Might be nice, yes. Right, so we're going to use we should substitute that into the line from the All in the Family theme now. You're saying,
but the fact of the matter is, Georgia voted for John Lewis, not Lester Maddox. That's what happened in this election.
Yeah,
because the opponent of John Ossoff, David Perdue, don't forget, was his folks were putting around ads with Ossoff's nose lengthened. And Kelly Loeffler was putting around ads with Warnock's skin darkened.
Yep.
I mean,
right up to the end.
This was Lester Maddox versus John Lewis, and John Lewis won.
Twice. So, yeah, that was a pretty good thing. And the fact that it was a double blow was really, I mean, you couldn't ask for better at the end.
We couldn't ask for better timing as well,
way, yeah.
Right before this debacle today.
Yes.
Which is going to be raucous, but, it's not going to change a thing.
Yes, true. I mean, that we've been over that, of course, but it's kind of a nail biter when you go into it saying, well, they're clearly going to fight this thing as though rules don't matter, and then you hear the rumors. Well, they're going to have a rally, and those weirdos who like to fight and sometimes bring their guns are coming to D.C. They rarely show up anywhere in numbers that can do anything, and they're not particularly serious people. But you don't. What is it? Pull the tail here, just like I'd like to see it stamped out and over and done with, but just like no one really wanted to call the race too early last night for fear that something could go wrong at the last minute and looking.
Yeah, I was hoping Fox News Desk would do it. And speaking of which, I tweeted this morning, and it's true. I found myself, instead of watching MSNBC or CNN this morning, I was watching Fox News. Because after the Yankees win, you want to read the Boston Globe and see how the Boston people are taking it.
Yes.
Right. It's fascinating.
Yes.
Because they're admitting that Biden's going to be president, and they're admitting that they won. And what they're talking about, of course, is how it's the destruction of America as we know it. Because when you're a white supremacist network, what else are you going to do?
Right.
But they're admitting they lost, which is like good.
Yeah.
Because their audience needs to hear. In fact, you may not like the results, and let me tell you why it's bad. But in fact, those are the results, and I think that's just a hugely important thing. So right now, Ossoff leads 16,370 votes. Hasn't been called by the networks, but Dave Wasserman and other people have called it because the outstanding votes are in the Atlanta area. And, so we're going to have two Democratic senators, and Kamala Harris is going to, decide 50-50 votes, and Mitch McConnell is no longer Dr. No. And appointments will go through, at the very least, nominations will go through.
Yes.
This judge's nonsense is going to stop. And what else happens, we don't know. We'll have to see. And with luck, maybe we'll also get to hear some actual real information about what went down with this Russia-Trump stuff over the last 4 years.
Yes, that kind of
Ryan Matsumoto writes, beyond Cobb Winnett, another important part of Georgia's transformation from a red state to a swing state is Democratic gains in the large, heavily Republican exurban counties like Cherokee and Forsyth. For example, in 2014, David Perdue's win was 61 points, 61 plus 61 in Forsyth.
Okay.
Right? And in 2021, it was 36.
That's
heavily Republican areas. In Cherokee County, heavily Republican, but not as numerous as Fulton or DeKalb. Cherokee County, 2014, Fulton and DeKalb are the Democratic areas. Cherokee County, 2014, Perdue won plus 55, and in 2021 it was plus 41. And those 12, 14-point erosions are just like the 2 to 3 point erosions from 2020 until now, from 2020 November until now.
I see.
2021. Those 2 or 3 point erosions were enough to make the difference between winning and losing for the Democrats. So it was pretty much across the board, as we saw with that blue shift picture that I showed you. Tom Boner writes, for what it's worth, Georgia reported 51,434 mail ballots received on Monday. So they'll count.
Okay.
And it's reasonable to assume that many, if not more, were received in drop boxes and mailboxes on Election Day. The stuff that Texas and other Republicans try to stop.
Cheating.
And this is why. Yeah. Right? And Ossoff will end up outside the 0.5% recount margin is the point. When everything is said and done, Ossoff's going to win, and there's not going to be a recount.
I hope so. I don't imagine there's going to be much energy for.
They can do canvassing. They can do whatever they want. But my new motto, is defund the GOP.
Okay, why not?
Right? Because if there's no money for these stupid show recounts and show canvasses, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Nobody's going to spend their own money on it. Even people who say they're billionaires don't spend their own money.
Now, this is a typo by Steve Kornacki, who corrected it later, which I'm sorry he did. But he says these aren't exact numbers, but it looks like turnout in Georgia's 2nd congressional district, Southwest Georgia, rural counties with large black populations, is nearly 90% of what it was in November. But in Georgia 9, heavily GOP Northwest Georgia, where Rump went Monday night, it's about 85%. I asked him not to correct it, but he did anyway.
Oh, too bad. Yeah, right. The rally, I forgot that they.
It's actually Northeast Georgia, but that's okay.
Is it? Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes some sense. Northwest Georgia, I think, is where Marjorie, what's her face, the QAnon.
Marjorie Green with an extra E
is from. Yes.
Michelle Bachmann with extra N's.
And one less L than it's supposed to have, I think, too.
Yeah. But Marjorie Green has,
She stole the L.
What can I say? She has one less knife in the drawer that she, you'd think.
I guess so. I saw the picture of
one
her
less bulb in the fixture.
Flying down on Air Force One with Trump for the rally. They took a nice picture together. I did find it very interesting. She's diminutive lady. She's a little short, 5'3" or something. Not outrageous or anything. I noticed that they were doing the thumbs up gesture, and Trump and how he's built, and
why didn't they just do the white power signal?
They probably have one like that, and they said, don't send me a copy of that one.
David Perdue actually did because he was campaigning with people.
He's shameless about that. I did notice with the thumbs up thing though, her hands I think are bigger than Trump's, which I thought was
everybody's
really
hands are bigger than Trump's.
That is true.
That's a very low bar to cross there.
But yeah, I think he's a foot taller than her, and I don't know, but she's got meat hooks. I think she's a tough lady too. I think she does a lot of CrossFit and stuff. So I don't know what that means, but, maybe lifting all those weights. You got muscular hands. Can you build your hands up? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, a little bit. Speaking of fake toughness, whatever happened with the lady who wants to bring her Glock to Congress?
Yeah. Well,
who
she's
can't even
with...
get like an American gun, like a Colt?
Yeah,
it's got to be an Austrian gun.
I know, that is a little weird. You should be buying
American at least.
Absolutely. She's in a little bit of trouble. I guess the cops in D.C. still waiting to talk to her about what is and isn't permissible with carrying a gun. She released an ad aimed at what? I'm not sure, but declaring her intention to carry her. I'm going to carry my Glock to Congress. I just thought that was kind of a weird thing to say. I think you're not fit to carry thy Glock, if you know what I mean. But anyway, yeah, she filmed a video of herself carrying her gun, and I guess she had to actually coordinate that with police, or police wanted to talk to her about the fact that you're on the street carrying a handgun. That's not actually permitted here in D.C., but she filmed
Yeah, you have to tape it behind the bathroom in the Capitol. That's really how it works. Then you can go to the bathroom, pick it up. It does
happen that way.
And then put it back there, but you can't take it out.
Yeah. But she filmed a video of herself walking to, she said, I'm small. She too diminutive in stature, saying she's 5 foot. I think she said 5 foot nothing.
I would, if you want to do it right, I would talk to Michael Corleone about it.
I guess so. There have been guns left in the bathroom in the Capitol before, and it'll happen again soon, I'm sure. She taped this video of herself taking her dangerous walk through the alleyways of Capitol Hill to the office, and then everybody in D.C., this is obviously aimed, I guess, back at the people in Colorado, but everybody who saw it from D.C. said, I came
to this liberal city, and I'm coming armed.
Right.
And said that, yeah.
And that's the alleyway between Tortilla Coast and Bullfeathers. That's where all the staffers hang out at the bars. There's nobody there. That's one of the safest places in D.C., frankly. But, oh well, nobody in Colorado knows that. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Well, let me welcome everybody back. Do that. Welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin is still with us. We're deciding which direction to go in. There's still so much to catch up with. We'll wing it and see where it goes.
Well, we got a lot of stuff in the pundit ran out today that was non-Georgia election, although clearly that was the important thing. The stuff happened in Pennsylvania in regard to not seating a duly elected and certified Democratic state senator. And the Republicans appointed themselves head of the chamber, but they did have the majority. I'm not totally sure what happened there and why that guy was singled out. But everybody else was sworn in, and I'm sure it'll get straightened out in time. It's just, it looked kind of silly.
It did. It was bad timing.
Do you know what happened there?
I do. There's a couple of extra. One thing I want to emphasize, everybody who got their eyes on that one yesterday, that they not only singled out this senator, but I will point out that the new Senate, well, not new, but continuing Senate President Pro Tem, who was presiding yesterday, it's a Republican chamber there, the Republican legislature in Pennsylvania. They were swearing in the newly elected senators, and the Senate President Pro Tem swore in, I don't know whether this is traditionally done in the Pennsylvania Senate this way or not, but they swore in the new senators. They basically said Republicans first. They brought up all the Republicans and swore them all in. Then they brought up the Democrats, and there was one quote-unquote disputed race in which a Democrat had won. And they basically
and was
said,
certified, but
yes,
his opponent hadn't conceded.
Yeah, and his opponent hadn't conceded, but I mean, he won the race. It was pretty clear, but they had several court cases. It went up and down the courts in Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled on the case and said, look, everything was validly done. The dispute was over the methodology of counting of absentee ballots and mail-in ballots as between two counties in the district. One county gave people a chance to correct ballot mistakes and counted ballots submitted, with either corrected signatures or if they were submitted before the deadline and otherwise properly filled out but were missing one element or another, that they would count them. And that was a decision that had been left to the counties by the state election law, duly passed by the same Republican legislators who pulled this trick. And the other county, which was given the same leeway, decided not to count them this way. And as it turns out, if they had both counted them strictly the way the second county opted to, then the Republican would have won by, some tiny margin. But if both had been left to do what they decided to do and were empowered to do, the Democrat wins. And if both had counted the more liberal, permissive way, the Democrat would have won. But the point was that state law said the counties get to decide, and they did decide. The Republican was angry that they didn't decide to do it the way that would have had her win. She sued, she lost, it went up and down the court system, and then she began suing again in the federal courts, and the federal courts didn't want anything to do with it. They said the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court has settled the issue, but she still refuses to concede and appealed to the majority in the state Senate chamber, and they said, well, tell you what we'll do. We'll just use our power as the majority to not swear this guy in. To what end? Until when? At what point will they be satisfied? They wouldn't say. They don't have a plan for that, I guess, until his opponent decides to stop trying to sue. And so they just decided, all right, well, we're going to have him stand aside. But the way they swore in all the Republicans first, and then the Senate President Pro Tem said he showed up for his swearing in. And the other Democrats said, he's supposed to be here. He's duly elected. He's certified. The state Supreme Court has said so. The state Secretary of State has signed the certificates. All the paperwork is in order, and it's all been upheld by the courts. And they said, swear him in along with us. We're not, we're not going to let you say no. And the Senate President Pro Tem then threatened him and said, I'm not going to swear in any Democrats until this guy leaves. So they swore in the Republicans first and then leveraged their, I guess, ability as the majority to simply say, well, how about this? We declare there will be no elected Democrats sworn in today, and we'll just increase our majority, which was pretty astonishing. As it turns out, the state senator in question then, his colleague said very graciously, I wasn't feeling so gracious about it, but he said, I'll stand aside today so you can go ahead and swear in all the rest of the duly elected Democrats. I don't want to ruin their day. Yeah,
which was lovely of him. The other thing that happened, though, as part of it to make it theater, is that ceremony leading the chamber was John Fetterman, the outspoken Democratic lieutenant governor.
Yes, he was originally...
who was booted out for not agreeing with the stupid scheme.
Yes, they wanted to have this guy stand aside and force him not to be able to take the oath. And Fetterman, who is a Democrat and the lieutenant governor and therefore the presiding officer of the state Senate, just like we do with the U.S. Senate and the vice president, said, to hell with that. No, that's a ridiculous thing to do.
I won't
going ahead.
Recognize that motion.
Yeah.
And because he didn't recognize the motion, the furious Republicans booted him out.
Yes, they had a majority vote, and they replaced him as presiding officer for the day and eventually barred him from the chamber, I think. But for a while, he stood there and insisted he was still presiding.
Because that's not what begs the question mean. But the obvious question that comes up then is, so do the Republicans do that with Pence today?
Yeah, I mean, they can. Well, they don't have I don't think they have the numbers to do it. But they should. Except now, Purdue is not a senator.
If Pence didn't go along with the stupid idea of Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz. More on that, and on Hawley at least in a minute.
More on.
But would they, in theory, be able to say, okay, well, Mike Pence, you are ceremoniously leading this, and we are unceremoniously showing you the door because you won't follow our will?
That's an interesting question, and I'm not certain that they could. If it was a Senate proceeding, then yes, if they had their 50 votes, which they don't. But because this is a joint session, the question of whether or not he would sit as presiding officer would presumably have to be approved by both the House and the Senate, and that would put the House Democrats in an interesting position to vote for Pence to continue as presiding officer. I don't know if they would. They might agree. You know what? What the hell? Remove him. What are you going to do? Put Grassley in there? We'll steamroller him too.
Yeah. By the way, there's just as many questions about Chuck Grassley's grasp of procedural process these days as there are for Dianne Feinstein. I just thought I would mention that.
Oh, really? Interesting. Yeah, I guess I could see that. Assume.
Yeah, you remember the part
capacity.
where you went over this on the show on Monday, where Grassley temporarily said, "No, I'm running the place." No, actually, I'm not. That's not what I meant.
I don't know how
he said something, and then his staff had to correct him. It sounded exactly like when Dianne Feinstein says something, and her staff says, "That's not what she meant."
I didn't know whether the staff
why didn't she know
said
what she meant? Well, that's what we don't like to talk about here in Washington.
Yeah, Right. So that was pretty crazy. I wish I had seen it live, and I'll have to go back and grab some tape of what happened in the Pennsylvania State Senate, though. But, Fetterman he's a big guy, and he's kind of scary looking. And they had to go. And
he's outspoken. He's not one to say, okay, I will meekly leave without saying anything.
And he didn't. And for a while, I understand what happened is they voted to remove him, and he was like, "Oh yeah, remove me," and they didn't, and he stood there, and the president pro tem got up there and started to gavel things and say, "We're going to do whatever, we're going to proceed with this swearing in," and Fetterman stood there and just shouted without a microphone next to him, shouted over him, "No, I'm still presiding here. You're wrong," and there were two presiding officers up there on the rostrum just competing for the attention of the Senate. I guess eventually they
it's almost like we had two competing sets of states of America.
Yes, or two competing slates of alternative electors
on the other. This is pretty interesting here. Anyway, so you look at it and say this will get sorted out. It's kind of silly, but you wonder what kind of Justice Fetterman presiding, because those are the rules. Civilians like me wonder how applicable is it for the raucous stuff that starts at 1:00 today, and that's what time it does start.
Yes.
So that we get to see what happens, because the procedure, as I understand it, is that Mike Pence says, let's go alphabetically by the states,
right?
And, here's your vote. And does anybody object? And if you do, you have to do it in writing. And if they do, this is a joint session, as David said. So if they object, then, and Alabama is an early A, if they object, then the joint session breaks apart and each chamber goes to huddle in their own place. Yeah. That is to say, the Senate leaves, because it's happening in the House chamber. And the Senate and the House each caucus for 2 hours, decide what they're going to do, then they come back, then they vote. And
they vote
so
then they come back.
That's a 2-3 hour delay right there. And if you do that for 6 states, you're talking about sometime tonight, this will get done.
Yes. Do it for all 50 and burn 100 hours.
Well, you're not going to get 50 because you can't find Connecticut people, for example, who are going to agree to this nonsense. But, for 3 or 4 states, you might.
But we'll point.
Because each state takes one senator from that state and one House person from that state to complain.
It just takes one from both bodies, whether they're from that state or not. They don't have to be. You can object to other states.
So Cruz can fulfill the Texas dream of objecting to Georgia's election?
If he wants to. Sure. Yeah. You may recall that the last time they had to split up and do any voting over an objection was after the 2004 election. The controversy, such as it was lodged over the Ohio electoral vote, and the senator was Barbara Boxer.
Barbara Boxer. I remember that.
She's not from Ohio.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you get to do it from wherever you want. I don't know. I don't think anybody has even the nutcases, I don't think, have said they would object to all 50. I don't see why not. I mean, just make a circus of it. But they say they're narrowing it down. I've seen the number drop down as low as 3, where they're just saying we're going to focus on 3 states, and I don't really. They gave an explanation for what their criteria was, but they're idiots. So what can I tell you? It could be anything. It's states where there are campuses of clown college. I have no idea, but they think
one of them should be Ohio, right? Because they want Jim Jordan on the stage, jumping up and down on the desk without his coat.
Yeah, well, he might be out there with his helmet and his boxing glove.
Yeah, it could be. So anyway, I'm not going to watch. I just think the whole thing is stupid, and it doesn't matter. And the whole thing is put in perspective by what happened yesterday in Georgia. And so, it's all the air has gotten out of that balloon.
Yeah, well, that's the great part about it, and I think that there was a moment yesterday where it all looked like it was going to be happening under the shadow of what happened in Pennsylvania. Everyone got very worried, and rightly so. And it's a good point, and you point out, look, for anybody who had doubts about whether or not the Republicans would, if they controlled both houses, have made their objections, split up, voted, and tried to sustain those objections and throw out the electoral votes and throw the presidential election into chaos, yes, they would have. Here's what they do in Pennsylvania, where they had that power.
Looking at Pennsylvania,
yeah,
they would have said, we're not going to seat Democrats. This is going to be a 100% Republican body, and there's nothing you could do about it.
Very possibly, yes. So they were prepared to press it that way. And I can't tell whether the Republicans in Pennsylvania thought that they were they would have done it on their own regardless, entirely independent of everything, or whether they thought that they were also building momentum that would carry through Georgia's results last night, and then they would be rolling into the 6th in D.C. today with that kind of momentum behind them. But it now will look like a terrible embarrassment up in Pennsylvania, and I think they'll rush to undo it as soon as possible. And if they don't, that's the sign of whether or not the fever has broken with the Georgia results or not.
Well, let's look a little bit about fever breaking.
Okay.
And that's going to be my last series of articles here. Well, let's start with this interesting Irina D. Manta, opinion contributor to the USA Today. And she has a piece entitled, "I lost a law school election to Josh Hawley. I moved on then. He should now on Trump. He beat me for president of the Yale Law School Federalist Society by exploiting the rules. He should follow my example and not contest Trump's loss." And when you read the story, essentially what happened is people who are entitled to vote for who's going to be president of the Yale Law School Federalist Society is generally the active members. But if you were ever a member of the Yale Law School Federalist Society, and you're kind of a alumni, alumnus, then theoretically you could still vote. Nobody does. And so what happened is that she does all the work, right? Yeah. She organizes everything. Hawley doesn't participate in any of the organizational stuff that's supposed to be the co-chairs, right? Yeah. This sounds familiar. So the lady does all the work and the guy takes all the credit. And then they both run against each other for president of the society. And unbeknownst to her, he contacts all of the ex-members, the alumna, and says, vote for me. That's never been done before, but he does it, and it's within the rules, and so he wins by a couple of votes.
Interesting. I can see how that would work.
She basically says he's always been like this.
Well,
he is Ted Cruz, except from sort of Missouri, except he really lives somewhere else.
Yeah, right.
And so, look, you did this to me, and I didn't complain, so you should not complain and just move on. So it's really fascinating. It's like reading about Ted Cruz's roommates and law school study partners, in which, he only would study from people from Ivy League schools, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you are who you were.
Yeah.
And you don't change. And leopards don't change their spots. And Hawley's always been a jerk. And now what Hawley has done is put his Republican colleagues in a terrible spot because now they've lost everything. They've lost the White House, they've lost the House, they've lost the Senate, and Hawley's backing this nonsense. Yeah. So the next series of articles, this one is also from USA Today. Phil Boas, Arizona Republic, writes, Donald Trump fires the shot that begins the Republican Civil War. Trump's plot to challenge the electors in battleground states pits the GOP against itself. This civil war won't just be painful for Republicans. In about a quarter of the GOP is with Trump. After the call, we know the call, Trump went to Twitter to punish Raffensperger, writing he was unwilling, unable to answer questions such as ballots under the table scam, ballot destruction, out-of-state voters, dead voters, and more. He has no clue. And Raffensperger pushed back in a big way. What you're saying is not true. The truth will come out. And it did. And then the tape went public. And we all know what happened after that. And so, it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem for Democrats, too. Trump, to quote Robert Oppenheimer's timeless recitation from the Bhagavad Gita, is, I am the destroyer of worlds. He's laid waste to the American political landscape. The Reagan Revolution's over. Conservative Party will never be the same, which is true. Politico, Republicans turn on Trump after Georgia loss. Fissures are forming as Republicans decide whether it's a useful thing to cling to Trump, even as he tries to subvert an election, or to distance themselves. So when Democrat Raphael Warnock defeated Loeffler early on Wednesday, and with Democrat John Ossoff having a good chance of toppling Perdue, he will, just a matter of time. He's already declared victory. Republicans were quick to blame Trump. Trump is the cause of this, lock, stock, and barrel, said one Republican strategist, of course, anonymously, which is the damn problem.
Yes, right. Okay, I got you.
That it's anonymous. But when you're relying on someone to win you a Senate race that also lost statewide 8 weeks prior, you're not exactly in a position of strength.
That is
the immediate recrimination is emblematic of the complicated GOP dynamics that have emerged after Trump's loss in November. Fissures are forming as Republicans decide whether it's useful to cling to Trump or distance themselves. And if the Georgia races are any indication, it appears Republicans are willing to turn on Trump if he can't reliably turn out the vote for candidates in the months and years ahead. When asked why Trump didn't prevail on Tuesday, a senior Senate Republican aide simply said Donald J. Trump. And the frustration stems from the days after the November 3rd election. They need to do it publicly. This is Axios' version, the Trump implosion. Driving the news, Democrat Raphael Warnock was declared victor. Democrat John Ossoff is on track to beat former Senator David Perdue. He is a former senator, right?
Yes. He's actually former right now.
Right now, he's technically former senator. Yeah. In the other runoff, with most of the outstanding votes in Democratic strongholds, that would mean Democratic leader Chuck Schumer becomes effective majority leader, taking power from Mitch McConnell. Yes. Why it matters? It's a fitting and predictable end to the Trump reign. The party has now lost the House, Senate, and White House on his watch.
Yes.
He leaves Democrats in full control of Washington's agenda with only the Supreme Court's conservative majority as a counterweight. That could be fixed, too.
Yes.
As a curtain call for Trumpism, approximately a dozen senators and 100-plus House Republicans today will publicly support an idea that many of them think is idiotic and doomed to fail as they protest congressional certification of President-elect Biden's victory. And between the lines, it'd be tough to go big with a 50-50 Senate, so don't assume a substantial shift for Democrats. But Democratic control would be a massive blow to Republican hopes of blowing up anything they truly loathe. And in fact, I would also say nominations, and dare I say it, judges.
Yes, you may say
what we're watching. Biden sources tell Axios he can now go more progressive on remaining cabinet picks, notably Attorney General and Secretary of Labor. And a big winner, Stacey Abrams.
Yeah.
Sally Yates may be acting Attorney General soon enough.
Oh.
And maybe that gets through Congress now. And what happens to Stacey Abrams? I'm guessing she can do whatever she wants, but I'm thinking, maybe she's the next Georgia governor.
Could be. I understand. I learned just now, I think, basically, that she was also a fairly successful romance novelist.
Yes.
I did not know that.
Yes. Oh, that was part of the secret, weapon that helped build support for her.
I did not. I had no idea. For some reason, that somehow escaped me, and maybe because I just don't read them. But yeah.
On the one hand, do not mess with the black church, and on the other hand, do not mess with romantic novelist reader
you bet.
fans.
Oh man, I'm telling you, there's so many interesting, like, strange secret channels out there for making political inroads of late that have, well, I guess they're not that secret because people find out about them. I don't because I don't know anything. But that seems like you're entirely right. You don't mess with them. I guess it brings to mind that the dark mirror of that is the way wellness and wellness moms have been like sucked into QAnon somehow through their weird wellness support groups and telling them, well, you're obviously against trafficking children, right?
Well, there's a lot of don't mess. Trump early on decided don't mess with voters who vape.
We're
not going to go.
Right.
We're not going to go and make it,
so strange.
Strictly regulated because they vote.
And there was a big thing about that, and that was, I think, a Bannon move. And Bannon also had this weird thing about appealing to the gamers, and that actually, by comparison, made more sense. I think in a weird way, but also just one of those weird political channels that you just wouldn't think of. And I guess that data mining gives you insight into. Very weird, very strange.
Exactly.
So anyway,
National Review, speaking of very weird, this is Kevin Williamson.
Successful in another area.
Kevin D. Williamson. Trump's final insult. Welcome to the Tuesday, a weekly newsletter that usually comes out sometime during the 24-hour period between Moon Day and Woden's Day. David's familiar with that because those are the headings I always use when I send stuff to him. On Skype, it's all linear, so I have to call it something in order to declare that this is where today starts.
So he decided to be
so
Nordic.
It's Moon Day, or it's Woden's Day, or Thor's Day. To subscribe to the Tuesday and receive it in your inbox, please follow this link. But there is some truth to the cliche holding that liars think everybody lies, that cheaters think everybody cheats, that thieves think everybody steals. Understood as an emotional self-defense strategy, that is a great deal of explanatory power. We may talk about having the fear of God in us, but what people actually fear is social rejection, which is why people with a paralyzing fear of public speaking are considered entirely normal, while people with an insistent terror of eternal damnation are judged fanatics and crackpots. We tell our children there's nowhere to hide, but everybody else is doing it. But that isn't quite true. See, a vice is not a problem. An unusual vice is a problem. An unusual virtue or an unusual practice of personal discipline can be an even bigger problem. As somebody who doesn't drink, how often some interested party inquires, what's wrong with you?
Well,
are you an alcoholic? Are you a Mormon? Are you a moral scold? Are you on a diet? And the subtext there, as Kevin Williamson points out, which I think is right, is are you implying there's something wrong with me because I do drink? So rugged individualists, that's us. And beyond the social consideration, the phenomenon that the old fraud Sigmund Freud called projection, a term and concept popularized by his followers, offers a degree of moral exculpation as well. Business swindlers and political hucksters are particularly prone to it, usually affecting a jaded man-of-the-world attitude. I didn't make the rules. That's just how business is done. You got to think that way if you want to be a congressman, right? That's me. Because we learned that. Because, like, if you have the gavel, you make the rules.
Right.
Or politics ain't beanbag. You know the type. They like to repeat a phony Sun Tzu quote they read on Facebook and pretend to be a character from Glenn Ross, never having actually read Sun Tzu or seen a David Mamet play. So maybe they'll quote the lawyer from whom the president draws so much inspiration, Roy Cohn. I don't care what the law is. Tell me who the judge is. This is the usual empty-headed law of the jungle stuff, familiar, tedious, and abandoned with a whimper the second a bigger dog comes along. And so it's no great surprise to find Donald Trump and cronies complaining about election fraud, even as President Donald Trump and his cronies were recorded in a telephone call attempting to suborn election fraud, threatening the Georgia Secretary of State. Okay, everybody go scramble and find out what suborn means. A Republican, note, with criminal prosecution unless he should find discovering by some black art enough votes to swing the state's election Trump's way. Now, I, Kevin Williamson, have on many occasions criticized the abuse of the word coup in our politics, but that's what this is, an attempted coup d'etat under color of law. It would be entirely appropriate today to impeach Trump a second time and remove him from office before his term ends. And again, I'll remind everybody, David knows this so well, if you impeach him, you get to ban him from running again.
Yes.
That's the main thing. Well, what's impeachment going to do? He's going to leave in a couple of days anyway. You get to ban him from running again.
Yes.
That would kill him.
Yes, and a
It
number
would
of
kill his
Republican
scam.
senators would
It would
want
kill
this.
his grift.
Should want this. Yeah.
That's why you do it. So nobody who has participated in this poisonous buffoonery, he writes, should ever hold office again. Right? He's got the same point of view I do.
Okay.
There was a time when there was a plausible, if sometimes self-serving rationale for working for the Trump administration. He's clueless. He's surrounded by crackpots. He desperately needs good counsel from responsible adults. But the Trump administration is not currently under the guiding influence of any such responsible adults. And there simply is no defending what it's up to. This cannot be excused or explained away. Trump's media cheerleaders, who like to call themselves constitutionalists and patriots, are no such thing. They are, for the most part, profiteers who will justify anything if it helps them hold on to 1 point of audience share as they peddle their various blends of snake oil. Woe unto them that call evil good and justify the wicked for gain, he says. I'm thinking Glenn Beck, but of course there's so many others, including Hannity and Judge Wine in a Box and all that stuff. There were never any reason to trust them in the first place, Lou Dobbs especially. But the events that have transpired since Election Day provide superabundant reason to understand them as an impediment to the conservative movement they purport to champion and a danger to the country they purport to love. David French, Kevin Williamson have been pretty consistent about this. You know, They are never Trumpers who stayed never Trumpers. Tom Nichols, Max Boot. Yes, they're conservatives, but this is important to them just like it's important to us. And, you find your allies where you can find them. So, no, not a Mitt Romney-style gentleman loser, just a regular loser. One is too dim and too lame to understand the gentleman part isn't the problem and never has been. The Republicans who were all too willing to swap their honor for a little bit of political power have been, like most people who have done business with Donald Trump over the years, ripped off. And there's no moral bankruptcy court in which to try to recover a portion of their loss. Right? It's just the end of the modern Republican Party, he goes on to write, basically. If you want to meet somebody at noon, then write noon. If you want to meet somebody at midnight, write midnight. And if you have the kind of social life where your friends are unsure whether you want to meet them at noon or midnight, you must be exhausted. So please don't confuse 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. He writes, why is he writing this?
Yeah, why?
Because you got to write about words. That's what I do.
Okay.
But he ends this whole screed with the next question: what will be built on its ruins? So he's trying to point out that words matter.
Okay, well, I'll take that. That's a good one.
And words do matter. And so what people said matter, and what they did matter. And with the end of Trump, we have to see what happens next. I'll be back on Thursday, and we'll do more. But I think that was a pretty good rant.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg on his way out the door, dropping a copy of that National Review piece and one more, I guess, which is similar in nature. Perhaps we'll take a peek at it. I'm not in the habit, usually, of looking at National Review, but I'll take his word for it that this one is like the last. I did see that one getting the Kevin, was it Williamson piece getting circulated on Twitter today, and I did think it was quite remarkable enough to hold on to a link to it. The other one here is, who is this? Michael Brendan Doherty, who I don't know anything about. This Awful Farce is the name of the piece, and I didn't really mean to click on National Review, but it is recommended to us on Greg's way out the door here. By the way, for those of you wondering whether you are going to miss finding out how crazy Trump is at the moment by watching him speak to his rally in D.C., Aaron Rupar is keeping an eye on that for you via Twitter with little video clips. 11 a.m., I guess, is when he's scheduled to go on. He's very politely, amazingly for him, waiting for us to finish our show here. Aaron Rupar says so far early, but the turnout for the Trump rally doesn't look all that amazing. It's not a great day outside. I don't think it's raining at the moment, but it's they're gathering out there, and they have some warm weather gear on, I'm sure. I'm trying to think of. Yeah, I lost the track of the Aaron Rupar tweet, but I don't think it's necessarily for you to have a link to it in order to prove that I did in fact read Aaron Rupar saying there wasn't an amazing crowd out there. I like to back everything up just in terms of letting you see it for yourself, and I guess a lot of the times the point is I'm not making it up. But sometimes I guess when there's no link, sometimes I am. I'm sometimes wrong about these things, but that's why I try to provide a link for every little thing. But this one I don't think will be necessary. Let's see what Greg has sent us here about this awful farce. How long would it take us to get a flavor for what's going on here? Oh, short piece. Let's take a look. It's awful farce and a short response to it, so that's good news. There is a price for this fraud, our subheader says. It erodes the adherence of the American people to their system of self-government. Okay, we'll get a flavor of this. The Republican senators and House members who are affecting to sort of maybe not really believe in the legitimacy of the 2020 presidential election are participating in a knowing fraud. Okay. They know, and you can know, they are participating in a fraud by their actions, namely their proposed remedy. A fantasy 10-day audit. This is Ted Cruz's proposition here. The 10-day audit of the results supposedly modeled on the 1876 Electoral Commission. Such a plan is illegal, a deep infringement on the states, but also time-limited, not to interfere with what they know will happen, the inauguration of Joe Biden as president on January 20th. The president's legal team, gifted with incredible resources by campaign donors and other saps, has been unable to turn up anything to substantiate its claims of material election fraud. There is nothing in the voter rolls, no suspected perps, no witnesses ready to testify in court, which is a different thing from testifying in a hotel ballroom, to material fraud. There's only a tape doctored by Rudy Giuliani and various theories and extrapolations. They're talking here not about the tape of Donald Trump calling Raffensperger, but of the videotape of the what Republicans claim is the votes being pulled out from a suitcase under a table. In case you haven't tracked that down, that too, one, obviously doctored, and two, already quite obviously debunked by elections officials and television news reporters down in Georgia, where they just basically said, all right, show me the whole tape. They monitored it, audited it with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and the investigators from the elections offices, and pieced the whole thing together. Right, Rudy Giuliani is showing this tape of something being pulled out from under a table. They watched the tape that included the part about setting up the table and bringing in what they put under the table and then bringing it back out again. And no, it wasn't a suitcase stuffed with illegal votes. It was a regular container that they put all the ballots in, and they stored it under the table at some point because they thought they were closing up for the night in Fulton County, or in the wherever they were in counting the votes in this particular venue. They said, let's close for the night. And they packed up and closed the boxes and then put the boxes neatly underneath tables to keep them out of the way. And then in the morning, they would come and start counting again. But they got a call from I guess maybe the Secretary of State called them up and said, yeah, don't stop for the night. You should keep going. It's really important that we get the count done ASAP. And the workers came back in and said, all right, where do we put those votes? Oh, yeah, right. We put them under the table, pulled them back out. That's what they're using. Anyway, just so you know, we were up to speed on that one. Back to the article here. You can tell these Republicans are lying because of what they say. There is no, quote, unprecedented evidence of voter fraud to talk about. So Senator Ted Cruz has premised this farce on an audit on the, quote, unprecedented accusations of voter fraud. And that was some interesting sleight of hand, right? Ordinarily, you would say, they set up the speech to sound like they were going to get around to saying, well, there's evidence, all right, there's unprecedented amounts of evidence. But that wasn't true, so he said instead that there was unprecedented numbers of accusations, which is not the same thing. Reminds me of a video that was out there yesterday. Was it CNN? Jim Sciutto questioning Congressman Clay Higgins, I think, from Louisiana, about this whole thing. Apparently, Clay Higgins doesn't know what the word preponderance means. They asked him, so what evidence have you got of any of these allegations of fraud? Now, name me one piece of evidence that would convince people. What evidence have you got? And he said, there's a preponderance of evidence. Clearly, he thinks that means like a plethora or something like that. There's lots and lots of evidence. That's not what preponderance actually means. It's on balance that the majority of the evidence tends to indicate something. But I don't know. So he didn't know what preponderance meant. So not only that, but when pressed for even further on it, said he didn't answer my question. He answers him. Good tip off here. If you're ever arguing with somebody and they then respond to you by saying "good sir" to you, you're talking to a weirdo. Anyway, where were we with this? Yes, right. Ted Cruz switching from unprecedented evidence to unprecedented accusations. Sure, an unprecedented amount of piss sprayed on enough legs might sell a few umbrellas, too. Wow, okay. The only problem is when the customers figure out your game, turn around and beat you to death with them. We're back. In case you didn't believe you were reading in the National Review, you're home again. They're saying that as right as you are up to this point, then the idea that you should beat people to death. It feels good, though, to hear other people say it, and you can blame it on them. Okay, anyway, what is the effect of raising questions, quote-unquote, raising questions this way, and speaking out for Americans who don't trust the results of the election? First, it gives permission to continue doubting the results and denying the evidence before our eyes. Second, and surely this is the effect, it allows second and third order demagogues and conspiracy theorists on social media to put you in a good light. A prominent QAnon-style conspiracy theorist whose posts are viral on Instagram suggested to followers that the protest aimed at Senator Hawley's family residence, which is in Virginia, not Missouri, were part of an ongoing attempt to assassinate and kill Republicans who were standing up in the secret war against the Biden coup. The elected Republicans who died of COVID before being seated are casualties in this ongoing dirty war, don't you know? The world, as told by Q and others, is not what you see reported in the news. The conflicts that you see in front of you, the elections, events, and burgeoning social movements are merely shadows of the real events happening below and beyond our reach. Your experience of politics and government is that much of it's shambolic and poorly organized, but adepts know better. They know that all these events have been planned. This fake politics is designed to raise hopes among the disaffected and untrusting Trump voters and to keep them engaged in the process. But there's a price for this fraud, namely, it erodes the adherence of the American people to their constitutional system of self-government. It atrophies their political muscle by feeding it with empty calories and giving them fake exercises of their political faculties. You get the idea here. Should we go on with this? There's only a little bit left. Why not? We'll finish with the flourish. Senator Josh Hawley claims to be speaking for 70 million Americans in asking questions about election integrity and saying he objects to the process in some underspecified way. He is a legislator. He could try to advance legislation. If he doesn't like the influence of tech, he could support laws limiting what tech could say. He could promote periods of media and social media silence, as some countries do. Maybe he doesn't want this. Republicans typically have preferred the management of elections to remain with the states. So grant that. He could, as a man with real knowledge of the law and influence within the Republican Party, lend his bully pulpit to efforts in the states to better govern mail-in voting, ban any practices such as vote harvesting where it exists, and tighten up election security measures. No, by the way, let me just say, here's where we depart. This is something you should need to be watching out for as Republicans say, well, if you want to get people's confidence back in elections, that's a fine thing. Why don't we tighten up security on mail-in voting? There's no need for this. The Georgia audits and count and recount and canvassing and recanvassing over and over again have found nothing to worry about in all of this. You are still, Republicans here in the National Review, you should realize this, fantasizing that you can clamp down on voter participation by those people you don't like by using this as an example. I'm just trying to bring people back into the fold of trusting government again. Be very wary of this, okay? We mentioned this yesterday, and it's happening again here. Let's see. Is there anything else here? Let's see. Becoming something of a pattern. Last year, Hawley gave a memorable and biting speech on the floor of the Senate after the Supreme Court handed down the Bostock decision, which extended the 1964 Civil Rights Act to be inclusive of novel gender identities and transgendered persons. He demeaned the decision as, quote, legislation written by a court. Courts are supposed to leave legislating to legislators, he thundered. He was utterly correct, in his view, that the court usurped the role of Congress and had done something Congress had pointedly declined to do for years now. All of this was 100% bang on. The problem was that Hawley did not finish the speech by introducing superseding legislation himself. He just outlined the duties of his job, but then failed to do them, letting the court prevail by default. He's stated events accurately from the Republican viewpoint, but here again, I depart from him. If at least there's the hypocrisy of, if you think that courts shouldn't be doing legislating and you're a legislator, well, gee, you know what to do about that. Get to it. All right, I got to jump out of this piece at this point because he's wandering back into being a Republican again, and I don't think that there's any need to use up our time on that. What else have you sent me here, Greg? The tweet of Ryan Goodman, who says, in the Conservative National Review, the Trump era ends in disaster in Georgia. That's a piece that he's included a screenshot of here. In the Conservative Washington Examiner, they say, Trump and his enablers stole the Georgia elections from Republicans. That's very interesting, too. And thirdly, from the American Conservative, Trump costs GOP the Senate. And you can't deny that there's that sentiment out there. It's going to be real interesting because, of course, Trump is spending his time insisting that everybody who is not doing his bidding and looking to overturn the election are betraying Trump and betraying true conservative values, etc. And now the other beacons of traditional homes of traditional conservative values are pointing out, no, it's Trump that's betraying us. So it's a war of finger pointing at this point, and Trump has very small fingers. So I assume this is another loss he should be getting ready to accept, or speaking to a therapist about, perhaps. All right, jumping off of those pieces, let's take a quick look around at what is in pocket here for sharing. Let's see, we spoke about Lauren Boebert and her weird plans to carry her guns around D.C., and that the cops want to see if they can educate her a little bit about what she will and won't be permitted to do. That's headed for confrontation, I think. Let's see, what else? Mike Pence releasing his schedule last night. According to his official schedule from the Office of the Vice President, he will preside over the joint session. Apparently, he was in conference with Trump yesterday. Various reports stating that he has told Trump, I'm not going to do this thing you're asking me to do. We'll see whether that comes up at his scheduled 11 o'clock address to the weirdos standing outside in protest of his election loss later today. I assume he'll be late, so in case you want to stay here to the bitter end of 11 o'clock, I don't think you'll miss the opening salvo, or you're in no danger of having that happen. You'll be able to catch it all if that's what you're interested in. All right, let's see. Yes, other interesting items, I suppose, in the wake of the phone call to Brad Raffensperger. Where else have I seen this written up? I think the Talking Points memo folks have been best at stoking the suspicions about this. But I'm reminded of it by, let's see, this tweet. What does this tweet tell me anything here in particular? Don Calloway, who tweets, last night the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, B.J. Pak, P-A-K, resigned before his planned stop date of January 20th, when the new administration comes in. This is significant for a few reasons. I saw a lot of speculation. Like I said, the TPM folks were kind of suspicious of this weirdly timed instant resignation. And I think a lot of the speculation was maybe when Trump was hinting to Raffensperger that he could find himself in legal trouble for not doing Trump's bidding and seeking to decertify Georgia's election results, and maybe he was leaning on the U.S. Attorney in the Northern District of Georgia to bring some sort of federal charges against Raffensperger or others there in the Secretary of State's office. And rather than do so, the person resigned. I think that was one of the speculations out there. But let's see why I put away Don Calloway's thread here. He did say this was significant, the resignation, for a few reasons, and provides a thread on it. First, it's important to state the obvious. Pak resigned on the day of the Georgia Senate runoff elections, that would be yesterday, which no matter who wins, this is a different theory, will be decided by razor-thin margins, likely in both races, and they're not that razor-thin, as it turns out. No matter which party wins, if the margins are thin enough, and it doesn't look like they will be, the other side will conduct formal and legal electoral challenges, and they may do that regardless, but the thin margins are important for who pays for some of those challenges. These challenges will carry more weight if they are initiated by the U.S. Attorney's Office, as opposed to being initiated by the Georgia Republican Party or, say, Rudy Giuliani. There is no limit to the lawsuits, injunctions, temporary restraining orders, etc., that actual U.S. attorneys can file in Georgia's federal courts to muddy up the waters between now and January 20th, thus keeping the election results in limbo for weeks, if not more. These challenges could keep the winners from taking the seats, which, of course, could have the ramification on the makeup of the Senate as Trump continues his last-minute desperation Hail Marys to remain in the White House. The challenge for Trump is that he needs a loyalist in the Northern District of Georgia's U.S. Attorney's Office. B.J. Pak, with an entire legal career ahead of him at a global law firm in Atlanta, would not throw away his career over frivolous and malicious lawsuits challenging today's results. And Trump didn't have time to find that loyalist, so he circumvented the line of succession to Pak's office, and that's an interesting bit highlighted by the TPM folks as well, and appointed Bobby Christine, a loyalist who is currently U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Georgia. Christine will head both districts for now. He's the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia and the Southern District of Georgia. Well, it won't last, of course, but at least it is said to be the case right now. So, with Christie, it says Christie this time. He's referred to as Christine twice, and I don't know what his name is. But anyway, this guy now heading both the Northern and Southern Georgia districts. Trump has a loyalist in place who can legally challenge the results in places where the Democratic votes are likely the heaviest, in Metro Atlanta, in the Northern District, and in Savannah, under the jurisdiction of the Southern District. A Trump loyalist in the Southern District is key here because Reverend Warnock is from the Southern District and is likely to outperform recent history's Georgia statewide nominees like Michelle Nunn, Jason Carter, etc. Got to have a U.S. attorney prepared to challenge that increased Warnock turnout. It's important to note that Trump didn't touch the U.S. attorney for the Middle District of Georgia in the Macon area. He didn't need to because he has the Dem voting centers covered with a Trump loyalist U.S. attorney. He once he appointed Christine to cover Atlanta and Savannah, covering Fulton and Chatham counties, respectively. A skeptic would say that the legal challenges were inevitable either way because the elections would be so close. They likely will be in the margin that triggers automatic challenges and recounts. Maybe so, but it's actually turning out looks to be not the case. But it would be foolish to underestimate the weight of these legal challenges coming from an actual U.S. attorney as opposed to Rudy Giuliani, etc. Well, anyway, I mean, the thread goes on, and it's very interesting. I'll refer you to it. You can take a look at it on your own, but it's beginning to fall apart because it doesn't look like there's going to be any challenges from the U.S. attorney's offices, none that stand to reason anyway. Not that that means there will never be any, but I guess if they are, we can return to this thread. I think our time, though, might be better spent not worrying about what happens if the margins are razor thin, because they weren't. Let's see. There's a lot of good articles I can share with you and will in the roundup about the situation in Pennsylvania and that one race that's in question. The Philadelphia Inquirer writing, here's the Pennsylvania election lawsuit over mail ballots that could overturn a race, but not the presidency. That's, again, the race in which the victor, the Democratic victor, I guess he was an incumbent as well, looking to be sworn into a new term, Senator Jim Brewster, having defeated his Republican opponent, whose last name is the only one I know, Ziccarelli was the name of his opponent. I know this only because Nicole Ziccarelli is the plaintiff in Ziccarelli versus Allegheny County Board of Elections. That's the case that they're talking about. An argument over 2,349 mail ballots cast in Allegheny County that arrived in time but lacked dates filled out on the envelopes. Those ballots, including 311 votes in the 45th Senatorial District, gave incumbent Jim Brewster, the Democrat, the win by just 69 votes. Everybody say, nice. The state Supreme Court affirmed Allegheny County's decision to count those votes. But the district crosses over into Westmoreland County, one of the counties that decided not to count ballots that lacked dates, classifying them as incomplete. That creates an unfair situation, is the claim here. Republican challenger Nicole Ziccarelli argued that in her federal court lawsuit, similar to votes being handled differently in different counties, which she says violates the U.S. Constitution's equal protection guarantee. She's essentially relying on the Bush v. Gore argument in this, and it doesn't look like it's going to work. It didn't work with the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court anyway. And it wasn't even over signatures. Again, it's putting the date on the ballot. Does it really even matter that, if it arrives on time? The fact is, who cares what date the ballot was filled out on? You want it, you ask for it, okay, whatever. But if you, by state law, leave the discretion to the counties, you're going to get different decisions. And I think that as long as the law contemplates that, then I don't think you have a real shot here. But that's what they're trying to do. Anyway, I guess the case still, there is a suit pending still. Or no, actually this was this article I'm looking at was posted in December 23rd. So there may no longer be a pending case in federal court either. But anyway, I think we'll stop even with this article. This too is good background, but I'm glad we got a chance to clear it up. It wasn't signatures that were at issue, which could bother some people. Instead, it was dating on the ballots, which really, honestly, shouldn't bother anybody at all. Armando sent me this update yesterday via the tweet of Frank Thorpe. Frank Thorpe is producer and off-air reporter covering Congress, that's what it says, for NBC News. So he checked into the question of whatever happened to those fake elector ballots and what will happen to them, and how do we know that they won't be slipped into Pence's pile of documents today? Well, Frank says he contacted the National Archives, and the archives confirmed to NBC News that it did, in fact, receive correspondence purporting to be an alternative slate of electors from the Republican Party in 5 states. Arizona, no word what happened to, or whether they got both slates or not, but they got something from Arizona, Georgia, New Mexico, which hasn't been in the mix up to now, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. Frank then goes on to say, but those slates were not forwarded to Congress because the Electoral Count Act allows the National Archives only to pass along slates certified by the states, which brings you to the importance of getting a certificate of ascertainment from the governor first. And if you go to the National Archives site, there's a reason they display both the certificate of ascertainment and the electoral votes alongside one another. That's how you know that the electoral votes that you get are valid. The governor first sends you the certificate of ascertainment. I have ascertained, as governor of this state, that the winner of the election was Biden, and therefore the electors who will be casting their votes are these folks here. And when you get a slate that says it's from these folks, provided it is properly filled out and authenticated, you know you've got the right stuff. If you get a slate of votes from, say, anybody else, then that's wrong. You don't want that slate. That's not the right one. So It says here, Frank says that alternative slates of electors received from entities that are not state governments, i.e., things that come from the governor or the state legislature and have the correct seal and everything, those are considered to be private correspondence. Just some idiot writing to the National Archives for no particular reason. And so those were not made public. But apparently they were obtained by reporters over at NBC News under a Freedom of Information Act request. They asked for it and said, all right, tell us where you got them from. No word on whether they're going to be displayed at any point, certainly not by the National Archives, but I'd be curious to see the Arizona one, just to see which ones did they get and which ones did they not. And that brings us to another point. Somebody else pointed out, and I'll dig it up for you, I guess, just to credit it later on. They said, after all that hubbub in Michigan and Wisconsin, those guys aren't listed here as having sent their slates to the National Archives. You mean after all that time they spent making arguments about it and trying to fight their way into the Michigan state capitol, they forgot to mail their slates to the archives? Amazing. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So much more to get through here today. But by the way, how's it going? I think we're doing better on the throat clearing stuff and the frogs in the throats these days. I think you were all curing me with your suggestions and product endorsements. And also, did I mention that Scott Anderson had sent me a box? I think so. A box of all of these various herbal teas. Very interesting. I've had the last 2 days. I should tell you in the morning. Today's show brought to you by yesterday. How did we do yesterday? Yesterday was Yogi brand, like not Yogi Bear, but I guess like Yogi Yoga. Right? There's no Yogi Bear on this thing. Yogi brand Throat Comfort blend of caffeine-free herbal supplement tea. And then I went with another throat-themed one that he sent here. Look at he's dug up a really this great pantry of products here. I guess I should be getting endorsement checks at some point from all these people. Traditional Medicinals brand organic throat coat tea, and I guess the common element in the two of them, I'm guessing they both had this very weird, I don't know what, like cooling, and you could feel that this. I guess this is supposed to be the soothing part, and a very distinctive taste to it too for the throat. And I think it might be slippery elm that is the, active ingredient in both, but both have similar makeups here. Oh, I didn't even realize this was a thing. Organic marshmallow root. I didn't even know. Is marshmallow something you're growing now? I thought maybe it's I'm sure that's a different thing. But all the herbalists out there will recognize slippery elm bark. Licorice root, there was definitely a taste of that in there. Never heard of marshmallow root before, but all the usual suspects involved in these things. And it's interesting. I guess maybe really that's more for like when you have a sore throat, right? I've begun to worry like maybe the idea of throat soothing coatings would be even worse for having a frog in the throat. I'm not sure. I don't know how to approach this thing, but. Anyway, things seem to be okay today and yesterday. I don't know whether I attribute it to the teas because I'm very unscientific. I'm also, changing other parts of the routine. The real basic problem, of course, is eating breakfast and then jumping on the air is just not really going to work out for that. But the best solution for that is getting up earlier. So I guess you'll all be living with frog in the throat instead. But all right, well. things seem to be going more smoothly. And I'll tell you this, the teas are quite enjoyable too. So thank you to Scott. And you can never go wrong with a nice hot beverage in the morning, except when you do. And if that happens, you'll know. All right, let's see. What else is worth pointing out here? Greg sends us the tweet of Jennifer Jacobs, who says, turning point in attitudes among allies of Donald Trump, a current paid Trump advisor this morning saying Trump effed the party. He effed the party with his conspiracy theories and pushing females and independents away from the party. The bleeding needs to stop. He needs to go. Okay, well, great. I hope you kick him out or whatever it is you would need to do in order to prove that that statement was worth something. What else has he sent here? There's bit here in different parts of the Twitter machines. Okay. It's the same quote in both. All right. We'll take that, see what happens at his 11 o'clock rally, and whether anybody has anything to say about that. Speaking of the 11 o'clock rally, I read yesterday's piece about the Proud Boys leader being arrested for the burning of the Black Lives Matter banner at a historically black church in D.C., and I wanted to throw out a different thought on that. Down at the end, I was reading towards the end of the article about how he's being charged and how he was planning on trying to wiggle out of any hate crime charges that might crop up by saying he didn't know that the church was predominantly black, and saying, we didn't Google the church and go, oh, it's a black church, let's target it. The sign was taken down because of what it represents. And I thought, well, in the weird vagaries of trying a hate crimes case, that might do something for you in the defense to say, we didn't know it was a historically black church. You say we targeted them because it was a black church, and therefore it's a hate crime, but we had no idea. And one, it's questionable whether or not they had any idea. But that's the sort of thing that could create some doubt, I suppose, in whether or not you add the aggravating factor of it being a hate crime. But then he goes on to actually say something else that I think could really be damaging to him, was that the sign was taken down because of what it represents. Remember, and I said, okay, this might work, but I should add this. He tore down a banner that says Black Lives Matter. It's not that you can't stand there and say, I didn't know what lives this banner said mattered. I just tore it down because it was a banner and I hate banners. He didn't say that. He said it was torn down because of what it represents. And what it represents is what it says. Black Lives Matter. He didn't, search the city to say, what I need is a banner that discriminates against everybody equally, and we'll tear that down and burn it, or whatever. It said Black Lives Matter. And he said, tear that down and burn it because it's talking about the black lives that matter. And while it's certainly true that a Black Lives Matter banner can and should be displayed outside of any church, no matter what the demographics inside, he said he tore it down and burned it because of what it represented. I mean, that's basically a pretty damning confession to exactly the sort of complicating factors that might lead to charging him with a hate crime. And it wouldn't matter really whether he knew the demographics of the church, although it should be pretty obvious. And there might even be like a historical marker outside the church that says that, but maybe he didn't read that. But it isn't the demographics of the church necessarily. See, if he had torn down a sign saying that they were having bingo night and somebody said, you've targeted a historically black church, that's a hate crime. There you might be able to say, we had no idea what the demographics of the church is, and you might be able to use that to escape a hate crimes charge. But the fact that you tore down a Black Lives Matter banner from a historically black church, we didn't know anything about the church. No, but not only did you know what the sign said, you said you burned it because of what the sign said. You landed yourself right back in trouble. You're a very bad person and a bad lawyer as well. So just wanted to point that out. That might not work out for them as well as he expected and as I thought it might in the heat of the moment. And just reading through this article, thinking about it a little bit more, I think he might be in more trouble than he thinks. Whether they charge him with the hate crime and feel like they can make that stick or not, we have to leave to the prosecutors. Okay. More interesting Philadelphia Inquirer coverage available of yesterday's hubbub, to downplay it a little bit, in the Pennsylvania State Senate, specifically about Fetterman being removed as presiding officer, that I can share with you as well. Let me throw this in here. This is a real interesting one. One other thing I'll shoehorn in here. Update on the last standing, I think, lawsuit filed by Trump in Georgia, where Trump personally and officially sued Raffensperger personally and officially. The federal judge rejects Trump lawsuit to decertify Georgia results, reported here quickly by The Hill. I'll just give you the headline. That's what you need to know. That's the disposition of that, and maybe his 61st loss in court. Add that to the losses all over the country and in Georgia, as I summed things up this morning on Twitter. Taking the excerpt of Trump's insistence in his call to Raffensperger that there's no way I lost Georgia, following that up with, of course, well, not chronologically speaking, but for him to say there's no way I lost Georgia. And then, of course, he in fact did lose Georgia, but also lost the Georgia recanvassing, the Georgia recount, the Georgia signature matching audit in Cobb County, the 60 court cases about the whole thing, and then 2 statewide Senate runoffs. That's a lot of losing in Georgia for somebody who says there's no way I lose in Georgia. It's just every time you try, you lose in Georgia. But other than that, no way, right? Okay, shifting gears entirely, and I reserve the right to shift right back to it because there's a lot going on. Here's a esoteric bit. I feel like I need to throw this one in there. It could be later in the week, but it's sitting right here. Pamela King, who writes for, what is this, like environmental news group, EE News. I don't know what the other E is for, but maybe it's E News, but environmental E News. Legal editor and environmental law reporter, picks up on this very obscure, I think, story, but very important. Just for all the things that you know that Trump is trying to screw things up on the way out the door. This is a very interesting one, almost brilliant. Someone else must have designed it. The tweet reads, EPA today announced a new rule to limit the agency's use of science, because they're anti-science, which critics say aims to weaken future air pollution and water regulations by limiting the use of research that relies on medical records or other private data. It's a really interesting and actually kind of clever ploy here, and I want to bring it up so that we can have our eye out for it and, pressure the right folks to undo it when the time comes. Kelsey Brugger is the reporter, Brugger, at E&E News. So environment and, I don't know what, energy perhaps. Here's the deal. The Trump administration, during its last days in power, fired another shot in its war on regulations and science-based policies, rewriting the rules on the use of scientific research at the EPA. Sounds important, right? The agency today announced its final strengthening transparency in regulatory science action, which critics say aims to weaken future air pollution and water regulations by limiting the use of research that relies on medical records or other private data. Let me do a long story short on this one, too, just so we can get to a little bit more. My understanding from a quick read of this yesterday is this. Under the guise of strengthening government transparency, they're basically saying, we want to be transparent in our rulemaking over at the EPA. And so, they, of course, want to strike down clean air and clean water regulations the best they can before they leave. And their claim is, well, in the name of transparency, we don't want any of these policies, particularly these broad sweeping policies and regional agreements that can affect industries across, the entire country, to clamp down on their emissions, whether it's into the air or into the water. If we're going to have regulations that restrict business like that, we want to be open and transparent about what backs up those policies. So far, so good, right? It still sounds like maybe a good idea. But what they're aiming at here is there are certain studies that have been conducted on which EPA regulations are later based. But they're medical studies that demonstrate, for instance, the harmful effects of water pollution and particulate emission in the air and affecting people with asthma and other respiratory problems, et cetera, but, exactly what you would expect. And based on science, based on scientific evidence and the study of medical records of people who have suffered these harms. And so now, essentially, they're saying, well, here's the thing. The conclusions of the medical studies are open and available and reviewable. Nothing untransparent about that, right? And that's how things have gone all along. But what they're saying is, well, how do we know that the conclusions of these scientific studies are correct when, after all, what they've been using to bolster their conclusions are essentially personal medical records of people who have suffered harm? Well, those medical records aren't open to public inspection. So therefore, there's a lack of transparency here. And we don't want to violate people's rights under HIPAA and various other schemes for protecting the privacy of personal medical records. We're for privacy as well as for transparency. And, they just don't mix, I guess, in this case. So as long as those medical records aren't available for public examination to see whether or not the scientists are lying in their conclusions that underlie the conclusions of the EPA, we just, I guess, can't have regulations from the EPA that affect these medical, that try and help people prevent these medical conditions, because, after all, originally the data is just not public. It's a real interesting twist. It's kind of a clever argument, and I don't think we have to worry all that much, because I think it's something that can be undone by a Biden administration, but it's going to have to be one of those top agenda items that you didn't think, do we have any more room for any more top agenda items? It was really interesting and kind of clever in that respect. I don't know. Now, it reminds me of another story that I may or may not have put aside in our pocket here, but I think that I can find pretty quickly. Perhaps you saw in the news the other day that the governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine, had recently signed legislation on imposing yet another new peripheral restriction on abortion in Ohio, which, as I understand it here, let's see. As I understood the law, it was a requirement that women who had had abortions for whatever reason were now going to be required by law in Ohio to either bury or cremate the tissue that remained from the procedure. It's just one of those weird, grim things that anti-abortion people sometimes try to force on people. And people pretty immediately recognized that it was a pretty serious privacy imposition and a pretty serious financial imposition as well. And just a weird imposition, generally speaking, of a particular, I guess, religious and moral framework on abortion, once again, that was just uncalled for, quite honestly. And so here's the local news reporting headline on it. Cremation or burial of fetal remains after surgical abortion becomes law in Ohio. DeWine signs the bill. There's not much more to say about it other than what's pretty obvious from it. But in addition to the additional financial requirements and, the weird trauma that it imposes on people, and the imposition on their privacy, somebody else pointed out, and this one I'll have to dig up on Twitter somewhere, pointed out that this will also, because it results in cremation or burial, it will result in a death certificate having to be issued. And that, too, is also a weird imposition in a lot of ways. But more to the point, is also a searchable public record. So again, in effect, what you're handing over, and this may ultimately be what they're after in all of this, is handing over to very dangerous abortion opponent people, stalkers and doctor shooters and clinic bombers, now a list of everybody in the state who's had an abortion and when they had it. So that now you can download all of that and go bother people who, in many cases, will have just lost a child essentially to a miscarriage that had to result in a surgical procedure to make sure everything remains healthy and non-septic. So that'll be just a terrific imposition on people in Ohio. I wanted to blurt that out because I thought it was, just another disturbing trend and, not new necessarily in this country, but I wanted to hold that up to the light of the other story where the Trump administration people and Republicans were pretending to be on the side of medical privacy. And so therefore you can't have clean water or clean air. But over here, medical privacy, F that. We're going to throw that right out the window because gimmitarianism. I just thought that made an interesting contrast. I thought it was worth spending some time on the show on that one. Let's see. What else can we toss in here? I feel like I feel awkward making this quick shift, but I think every day is going to be a lightning round this week. On the circulating rumors that perhaps Prestwick Airport in Scotland, we've heard this rumor quite a bit in the last couple of days, preparing for some reason for what they specified only as a visit from a United States military, the military equivalent of the Boeing 757 would be landing at Prestwick Airport at some point in the near future, and everybody should be prepared for that. Apparently, it was claimed that it's standard operating procedure when a plane like this, and we're talking basically about one of the Air Force One type planes, whether the president is on it or not, changes its name, of course, but that apparently when one of them is expected to land somewhere, you give heads up to the airport several weeks in advance because there's a lot of groundwork and preparation that needs to go on for something like this. And apparently Prestwick Airport has gotten one of those notices. Prestwick Airport, apparently the closest to Trump's Scottish golf course at Turnberry. And also, by the way, not long ago we reported that it was the site of some weird military activity, that lots and lots of U.S. Air Force refueling was going on there. And there were some questions about whether or not that was steering any money to Trump because the pilots and the air crews were all, there are hotels near Prestwick Airport that they could be staying in, but they were instead being bussed an hour away to stay at the Trump resort and paying, the United States government paying for them to stay there, and that money landing in Trump's pockets, all kinds of craziness with Prestwick Airport. So now it turns out that they were on alert that such a plane would be perhaps landing at Prestwick Airport on January 19th. And of course, with everybody reporting that Trump had no intention of attending Biden's inauguration, they thought, what's this all about? And, people began to speculate. He's going to, abscond to Scotland, which I don't think is a place you can safely abscond to if you've really done something horrible and you need to be extradited. But whatever, it got people thinking about it. Or maybe he's just taking a vacation and wants to do so in a place where he won't have to read the American news every morning. And I thought interesting also that he was going on the 19th rather than the 20th, because again, one of the things that I think the Biden administration perhaps ought to be thinking about is denying Trump the traditional courtesy of a final flight on Marine One and Air Force One, which then gets a weird different designation. I forget what they call it, Talon One or something like that, as they fly the president, the outgoing president, back to where whatever rock he crawled out from under. In this case, they assumed Mar-a-Lago. I don't know whether Biden is the kind of person that can be convinced to simply deny him that, but I suppose so long as he continues to deny Biden's win, I suppose it's possible that he might feel it was wise to deny Trump this additional honor. But I thought, maybe he's flying there on the 19th, not just so he's not even there on the morning of the 20th, but so that the Air Force One is still under his command, and Biden can't turn him around. This might be one thing for Biden to say, fine, I'll fly the guy to Florida, but I'm not flying him to Scotland for a vacation. That you're going to have to pay for yourself. Anyway, it might not matter. Scotland, as it turns out, by the way, going into a month-long COVID lockdown, thanks to the new, more transmissible mutation of the virus, which is in circulation in Britain. But they say they're pretty serious about it. And no, Trump won't be allowed to simply violate their lockdown and waltz in for a Scottish golf vacation. That, according to Scotland's, as it's put here in the Yahoo News, Scotland's leader, who I'm not familiar with, but it's Nicola, how does she pronounce it? Nicola Sturgeon, on Tuesday poured cold water on rumors, that's spelled with a O-U-R-S, that Donald Trump was set to visit, saying even the U.S. president was subject to coronavirus travel restrictions. Speculation has grown that Trump, who is still refusing to concede his election defeat to Joe Biden, might skip his rival's January 20th inauguration and travel to his Turnberry golf resort in western Scotland. The Sunday Post newspaper reported at weekend that Glasgow Prestwick Airport has been told to expect the arrival of U.S. military Boeing 757 aircraft, this type usually or occasionally used by Trump, on January 19th. And I guess actually the 757s are the ones that don't usually get used as Air Force One, but are in fact used by the vice president when he travels or when the first lady travels on her own. All sorts of details about that. But so what? They say no. You can't do it, so maybe it won't happen. I have my doubts about what was going on there exactly because I don't think it's warm in Scotland right now, and I don't know whether, but maybe he just thought, I need a nice place outside of the U.S. to escape having to see Fox News report on the Biden administration. Anyway, I don't think that was a major concern for anybody, but I thought I would throw it out there. And then this one, I guess I'll mention this. I did this on the way out the door yesterday, and I didn't get to tell you the details of it. Not much time to do it now either, but kudos to the folks in California. I don't know how to pronounce the name of your town. Is it Ukiah? Is that right? Or Ukiah? I don't know. You tell me. But anyway, here's the story. Their freezer failed. Los Angeles Times reports it this way. Its freezer kaput. This Northern Cal or NorCal hospital had 2 hours to give out 600 vaccine shots. Now, we've been panicking all over the country when there are like 5 shots left and they don't know what to do with it. They have got all 600 of them to give out. And to their great credit, Adventist Health Ukiah, I'm not sure, UKIAH, Ukiah Valley Medical Center in Mendocino County, getting ready to hold their first inoculation sessions, find out that their freezer's broken. And Ukiah, is that right? Okay, that's thanks Justice for that production note. My best shot. Ukiah? Okay. Well, they're getting ready to give out their vaccine, and now not only do they find out that their freezer wasn't working, but just to compound things, apparently there is a Ukiah. Okay. It is Ukiah, not Ukiah. I don't know. I got my pronunciation. I misunderstood your pronunciation guide. Their freezer broke, and apparently they have an alarm on the freezer. This should go off in case the freezer breaks, because if the freezer breaks, all of our vaccine and everything else that's in there could spoil, and we don't want that to happen. But guess what? Their freezer broke, and so did the alarm. Luckily, they managed to find out in time. They had about 2 hours left on the life of 600 doses of vaccines, and they just called everybody they could think of and basically said, bring us your arms. Everybody come in here, and we're going to jab it in everybody that we can get it into. And it's a smart policy. And they didn't just do it randomly on the street necessarily. They called a couple of long-term care facilities and elder care facilities and said, you want some doses? Come and get them, but give them out right away. They called some doctors, some frontline workers, some rescue workers. They gave them to a local prison staff so they could inoculate at least the guards. They were thinking about inoculating the prisoners, but apparently they couldn't get the privacy and consent protocols and safety protocols all worked out in time. 2 hours is not a lot of time to work stuff out like we're going to bring a bunch of sharp objects into a prison population. How can we handle that? You got to really think about that. Anyway, they managed to pull it off, and it's remarkable. And as it turns out, it's a lead into another story that we should probably talk about later in the week. Apparently in New York State, Governor Cuomo is inserting himself in the vaccine distribution scheme in such a way that it appears to be preventing what I think is the smarter approach that some other states and the District of Columbia have been taking, that when you run into a situation like this and you have vaccine that's going bad for one reason or another, it's going to be okay to jump outside of the protocols of vaccinating Group 1A first and saying, rather than let this stuff go to waste, put it in any arm that will take it. Because after all, it doesn't really hurt us in any way to make more people immune. It'd be nice to get it into the doctors first, but I think the doctors would agree that if there are fewer people coming into the hospital with severe COVID, there's less chance, again, of them getting infected that way, even if they haven't had their vaccine. So vaccinate somebody. Meanwhile, out in Nebraska, the governor is doing the exact opposite, apparently presented with the opportunity to be anti-immigrant and racist because he loves Trump and he's such a winner. He has declared that it will be undocumented immigrants, many of whom work in the poultry processing plants there, will be ineligible to receive the vaccine because, of course, the vaccine is itself racist and prejudiced and is happy to have things done this way.
FromNetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Right, I think we all understand the science behind that, right? You're going to have to vaccinate people. It doesn't matter. The virus doesn't care what country you're from. Believe me, and you're better off. But instead, in order to be racist, he's going to shoot himself and all Nebraskans and really all of us in the foot. Fantastic, right? More about this and everything you could possibly imagine next with Justice Putnam.